So as a cover image, actually I put something that's different from what the topic is about. We were talking in Nagarkot about where the haze might have come from. And what this is a satellite image that also has all the fire spots where big fires were taking place. This was around 10 a.m. in the morning that we drove up to Nagarkot. Nagarkot itself is here. And so with a few hours, very likely the smoke from the fires would have come there. This morning you already heard a bit about using computers to simulate air pollution and also using satellites to monitor air pollution over broad areas. But data on the ground is still needed to give you a sense of what is happening at the ground level, how that connects with, are the models working properly or not, and also, I mean, what you're measuring from satellites, does it make sense or not? So there's several purposes for ground level monitoring beyond that. One is to assess what people are exposed to, which you don't get directly from satellite measurements, for example. To collect high-frequency time series at the same location. If you have 2 satellite overpasses per day, that doesn't tell you what's happening at every hour or every minute or so. Also, ground-level data helps better understanding of what the sources are of the pollution, what the processes are. If you have a station and a big truck passes and you see the signal from the truck, and of course also verifying models and remote sensing. I kind of divide up ground level measurements into 3 types, kind of based on what the purpose is. One is long-term monitoring at a single location. The second is field campaigns, and I'll tell you more about what those are. And then the third is exposure measurements, which I will not go into much detail here today. So long-term measurement stations, very often they're run by governments, in some places by city governments, often by national governments. And they use durable certified instruments, generally bigger, heavier, more expensive, more power-consuming instruments than what we carry to Nagarkot. But you'll get Sujun will give you a tour of some of those instruments sitting in a container down in the parking lot just after this session here. One of the important things for good data is that the instruments are properly calibrated, and I think Sujun will tell you a bit more about how the calibration happens. It's making sure that if pollution is 0, the instrument's actually showing you 0 and not showing you 50 or minus 100, and that when, let's say, actual PM10 concentrations are 200 micrograms per cubic meter, that the instruments are showing you 200 and not showing you 150 or 300, so that there's a lot of things that can knock off an instrument's accurate measurements, and so calibration is the act of checking and readjusting the instruments frequently to make sure that what they're measuring matches with what you're looking for. Also, it's quite important for long-term monitoring stations to be at relatively representative locations. So not next to a single local pollution source, not right next to very busy roads where the pollution levels go up and down very frequently because of passing traffic. So next I want to show you a bit about what we're doing at ICIMOD in collaboration with partners. At the moment in Bhutan and in Nepal, but with the expectation that over the coming years we'll expand our work into other ICIMOD member countries. So one of our big tasks is to set up 2 background monitoring stations for monitoring both greenhouse gases as well as air pollutants at locations sort of over the Himalayan foothills, mid-hills at about 2,000 meters altitude. There's already a station at Manora Peak near Nainital in India, by having one in Ichakama, Nepal, and Gedu in Bhutan. Then we have a kind of south of the Himalaya inflow towards the mountains stations. We've been working on these for the last 3 years or so and planning to set these up. Both of the stations will be on mountain peaks. The reason we want them on peaks is that we want to be able to capture air coming from all kinds of different directions, and we want them to be representative of a large area. So it shouldn't just, if you put a station right here, you probably get the smoke from this house. If you're up on the peak, then the air that flows past from any direction will be captured. So stations on peaks can capture air from quite representative air over quite broad distances, and we can trace back where the air is, as you see fluctuations in pollution levels in the data, and you can trace back using modeling to see where the air might be coming from. Here's a view from Gedu looking down towards Funtalin. And kind of the site itself is on a peak near Gedu. Requires a little bit of a drive on a rough road and about a 45-minute walk to get to the top. We choose peaks that are not already full of infrastructure and full of access because we want no local pollution sources at the peak itself. So the construction is going on right now for the Gedu station. And the way it's designed will be a small building there with a tower. The tower to take you above the trees and also to do wind measurements at 10 meters altitude. And there'll be a small public room and then 2 laboratory rooms, office and storage space behind it with windows from the public room in. So visitors could come and look into the labs through the windows, and also this would be a training area or small visitor center. This was a slightly old site. We said expect completion by October. It's now November and construction is still going on, but it's within the next couple of months this should be operational. The access to ICIMOD is kind of similar from the paved road. It's about an hour drive up 16 kilometers up a rough road with very little traffic. We want that deliberately. And then from the point where you can stop from the vehicle, it's still a 15-minute climb up. A 15-minute climb up from the nearest road. You see this way the view over Chitwan, Namalparasi and on towards the Indo-Gangetic Plains. The view to the north from ICIMOD, you see the Manaslu Himalaya. Down below, can anyone from Nepal guess what the place is here? This is Kurintar, and then Monokamana is here. So at ICIMOD, we're working right now with the Forest and Environment Ministry and acquiring a fairly large area of land that's being restricted access land, and then at the peak itself to set up the station. A similar design to the one in Gedu, with slight adjustments for the local site. This is what the peak looks like, and we were using some ropes to chart out the place where the station would go. Both sites are kind of designed to have space for additional instruments to come stay there long term or to come visit. And apart from those 2 sites, we're also working on several other monitoring stations. One is down in Lumbini and up in Langtang at about 100 meters above sea level and 5,000 meters above sea level, where you have almost a straight line from Lumbini to Langtang passing through ICIMOD. And then also urban monitoring stations in the Kathmandu Valley. In Bhutan also, we're setting up a station down in Pasakha at the base below Gedu, up in Chelela, and then an urban station in Thimphu. In Lumbini, we already have temporary instruments on the water tank. The final site is slightly away from there. We have a 20-foot container delivered similar to what you see down in the parking lot. And we're trying to... And then at the high altitude sites in Langtang, at 5,000 meters, our colleagues who do glacier research already have a weather station in place. And so we'll put in an instrument to measure black carbon right next to it, and over time add other instruments. But of course, there's no electricity line there, so it has to be solar powered or wind powered, so it will be more challenging. We've had some delays, of course, with Langtang after the earthquake, but access is slowly getting restored. In Chelela, we're waiting for final permission. This is probably the most accessible 4,000 meter site anywhere in the Himalaya. Paro Airport is just below, so it's an hour and a half drive from Paro to here and about a 45-minute walk. So you can have breakfast in Kathmandu and be at the site in 4,000 meters in Chelela by lunchtime. The air quality station in Thimphu, my colleagues Sujan, who's here, and then Praveen, who you met on Monday, already helped set it up. So we have instrument measuring PM2.5, PM10, as well as a black carbon instrument already running, being tested. We're working on data transmission issues from there and kind of waiting to hear when the formal inauguration will take place. And I assume the colleagues from Bhutan in the room will all be there. Right now, if you just walk up to it, it's this relatively boring container there. We're also working on designs for how to cover it with educational materials about air quality. And of course, we'll be happy to give you inputs about what you think would be useful for that as well. Okay, now to move on, about field campaigns. Very often, scientific journal papers come out of, not from long-term monitoring sites, though occasionally also, but very often from field campaigns. Those are basically limited duration studies with multiple scientists, often from multiple institutions, sometimes from multiple countries, with really a focus on answering specific questions. New questions, new scientific questions that help explain something better. So I mentioned briefly yesterday about the winter fog study that we're planning to do. And so the winter fog study, it's a field campaign, but also more than just the field component itself. We'll have coordinated measurements across the region, as well as numerical modeling, which Bhupesh explained, using satellite data, and then engaging social scientists to understand better the impacts and connections to human activities. What our hope is both to come up with high-quality science publications, but also policy recommendations, like I mentioned yesterday. If there are specific activities that are contributing to the fog, what are they, and how do we reduce those? And here's a temporary map of the sites. We'll finalize those in the next 2 weeks about where the measurements are going to take place. The Multan site has now moved to Faisalabad, for example, in Pakistan. That was just recent before I did this. In spring 2013, we hosted a field campaign in the Kathmandu Valley called SASCAT, Sustainable Atmosphere for the Kathmandu Valley. That's co-branded with the Atmospheric Brown Cloud Project. He and I kind of led this thing, and the focus, we were trying to understand the physical processes and dynamics of air pollution in and around the Kathmandu Valley, also understand better what the sources were. So the intensive field measurements were over a half-year period. We had quite an international team participating, a data analysis workshop in August 2013. And just to give you a sense of the timescale of how things go in science, finally now the papers are just starting to come out. We have 1 or 2 that have been published, some accepted for publication, a lot going through peer review. It takes a long time from when the measurements are carried out until we actually have detailed answers of the questions that we were asking, that we were trying to. The sites where the measurements were taking place during SASCAT, we're here at ICIMOD. We were up in Nagarkot. North of the road to Nagarkot, there was a place called Borde where we had the super site which had all the instruments, and then additional sites up on the ridge top on the mountain pass coming into Kathmandu, getting the exchanges in the river valley down to the south, and then the city center location in Baknajal as well. This is from filter sampling. I showed this slide before already, I think. I have to bore you with some graphs of data. The top one is black carbon measurements. This one is black carbon measurements, ozone, and coarse particles and small particles over 24-hour periods. So midnight, noon, midnight, in different seasons. You see in the monsoon is blue. You see everything is quite a bit lower. You see this morning and evening peak in pollution that I already talked about earlier, except for ozone. Ozone forms in the atmosphere through chemical reactions, so it actually needs sunlight to form. So you see ozone growing in the morning and then decreasing again in the evening. Here are black carbon measurements over the whole, over the 6-month period at several different sites, and you see they follow a fairly similar pattern in the valley bottom locations. In Nagarkot, you don't get the morning peak. The pollution sources are down in the valley. If you look at just the Borde side black carbon data, again you see the seasonal differences, and you see again the morning and evening high levels. Also, looking at black carbon data collected here at ICIMOD, we were comparing data from times when there were, this is again over 24-hour periods, times when there were power cuts and times when there were no power cuts. What happens during power cuts here? Diesel generators get turned on. And then in Borde, which is close to the brick kilns around Bhaktapur, the top data is top one is just PM10. The bottom one is different minerals, different chemical species that make up PM10. So calcium, chlorine, sulfate, sodium. you see a sudden jump and increase in pollution around January 4th. That's when the brick kilns started operating. And this is how the brick kilns would look when they're actually operational. When you were visiting, they were not running yet. Here are the brick kilns in the Kathmandu Valley on Google Earth. I believe the one you visited was one of these over here. See, brick kilns are a big problem for air pollution. I guess Kunda yesterday talked a bit about how there's also child labor issues and social issues associated with them. But there's also an issue of loss of agricultural land because the brick producers rent a lot of farmland to use to dry bricks. So all these gray patches here are what should be rice fields, but they're being used for brick production. So see, these are the actual rice fields here, or the actual fields. And so there's a loss of really fertile land for brick production. Okay, now let me talk a bit about another field campaign. This one was focused on understanding emission sources, and Prakash, who you met on Monday, was the main person from ICIMOD leading it. We want to understand the chemistry of what comes out of different fires, different emission sources. So it was a collaboration between scientists here at ICIMOD and groups from six scientists from universities in the US who brought their equipment here. And together they went around, sometimes lighting garbage fires as here as in the ICIMOD parking lot, as you recognize, but also going to brick kilns, going to a cook stove testing lab, and then bringing in their instruments as well to test out various cook stoves in a lab setting, or going out and measuring emissions from fields and measuring diesel generators, pumps, etc. The plan was to have something like 90-ish or so different samples measured. 54 samples were collected, or tests were done before the earthquake. And the whole team was on the road back to Kathmandu from southern Nepal when the earthquake hit in April. And so the project kind of got interrupted, and we're trying to find a way and a time for all the equipment to come back again to do further measurements. But so they didn't get through all the intended sources yet. Wanted to do a lot more measurements of diesel truck emissions, for example, but at least got interesting data so far. And what this data helps with is improving the emission inventories that Prakash was talking about. Having better emission factors to go into the emission inventory. So you see, field campaigns can be on very focus-specific things. Okay, let's get a bunch of scientists together and answer a few questions, which is also ground-based measurements. What is also quite common in some cities, but we don't have any here to show you, are mobile vans. Basically, trucks that are equipped with instruments that can be driven around, parked in a certain location for a few weeks and measure what their pollution is like there before they're moved on again. I'll keep my presentation to this, and I'll be happy to take questions and discussions.